Okay, so welcome back. This is going to be part two, and this is episode one, but we like to break them down into bits and pieces. And I had promised you in episode number one that what I would be doing is talking about my juicy porn story and how I got to be a porn addiction recovery coach. And I guess you're looking for some kind of really, really juicy story. And I don't know if I have something like that, but I don't really have that. So I guess you would maybe be a little disappointed, but there are some really, really juicy porn stories out there. Everything from people spending all weekend on watching porn. I hear stories about people go to their bathroom and they go to their bathroom for like 45 minutes, and we're talking married people, and the porn addict thinks that the wife doesn't know, right? And I mean, I know you're sitting there saying, like, how could that be? Yeah, they think that for some reason, but it doesn't really matter that they think that, but it doesn't happen. And that's the part that I'm talking about, the pornified mind, that someone would actually go to a bathroom for 45 minutes, watch porn, and ejaculate. And I don't know, in some cases, maybe they do it 2 or 3 times. And then this goes on like 3 and 4 times in a day. And then when the wife asks about it, they say that they're having some kind of issue and so on and so forth. Now, I've talked to women, a ton of them, and I've also read some of the things that have been said. And then, like, the guys, they think they're so smart, but they're not really smart because, again, like, how can you keep going to the bathroom over and over again for 45 minutes at a time and somebody not know anything? And so, I can tell you right now that I was a class clown when I was growing up. So I hope that some of the things I say are funny, and I hope that the funny part is appropriately placed. But, it's just what I do. So that being said, some of the comments that the women write, because again, the guys aren't that smart, like, you're going to continuously go to the bathroom for like 45 minutes, and take your phone. Oh, yeah. Oh, Joey, you forgot that. Yeah. And they take their phone for 45 minutes, right? And so the women, they say these things like, they go to the bathroom and it doesn't stink in there. I mean, like, they know, right? And here's a problem, like, to the porn addict out there. And there are porn addicts out there. Some of the porn addicts, they do all this watching of the porn, and then they turn the shower on, and then they do their do. I think you know what do is. And then they let go. They let it go, so to speak. Ejaculate is another word. In the shower, they run the water so no one hears, and they think they're slick. So here's a problem with that. And really, this whole porn addict thing, it's like, it takes life to a level of sickness that I can't tell you about. in one podcast, but we'll get into it. I assure you that we'll get into it as we go by, and I'll give you these little pieces of stuff. Some of it's funny. I'm laughing at the fact that it's funny because it's so blasted ridiculous. It's crazy, and then some of it is sad funny. But one of the things that happens, because things in life add up. Life is the great math teacher, I always say. So when these guys over like months and months and months, ejaculate in the shower, and then they have women, beautiful women at that, who they're not serving, if you understand what I'm saying, because this is about porn addiction. They're not necessarily serving their women because they're doing all this looking at porn and grabbing themselves and ejaculating in the shower on 4-hour visits or 45-minute visits. So anyway, all this ejaculation in the shower, if you got one of these pretty babes with long hair and her hair gets clogged up in the shower with all that ejaculate, I'm not trying to be overly graphic, that causes plumbing problems. So women, if you're watching this or listening to this, that's one sign that your man's got a porn problem, is if the shower gets clogged up repeatedly, because that's what the women tell me. So anyway, that's some other people's porn stories to kind of get you started. It helps me get warmed up a little bit, because this, sometimes talking about this stuff it's really personal. But at the same time, if it can serve you or serve somebody or make a difference in somebody's family or make a difference in somebody's life. And before I even tell you my story, I guess I got your attention because you want to hear all that juicy detail. But, and I think one of the reasons why I love this mission or take on this mission about helping men become more healthy in this capacity is that this porn thing has a way of attaching itself to bloodlines. It, it just doesn't stop with the subject. It goes like generationally. So anytime that we can intervene with a porn addict or a sex addict, we're actually changing bloodlines, because it really does touch bloodlines like you just wouldn't believe. Like a lot of how people stumble into porn. It wasn't my case. We'll get into my story momentarily. But a lot of times how people stumble into porn is because of an adult in the home or their father was watching porn, and then the kid went behind and stumbled into porn. For instance, something innocent like typing in Power Rangers, which is POW, for the first couple of letters. The first two letters, PO, are also the same first two letters in Pornhub, which is one of the leading porn sites. So inadvertently, all of a sudden, he gets porn. A friend of mine, a fellow coach, he stumbled into porn for the first time in church, on the church computer. So, it happens that way. And it is about bloodline. And it is an addiction. And it's addiction because 5 neurochemicals get activated through the cycle that people do. People aren't just watching porn. They watch porn, they get excited, penises get hard. A hard penis wants to be massaged some kind of way. Massaged hard penises ejaculate. So the combination of all three of those things causes 5 neurochemicals to be activated, and it flushes you It flushes the brain neurologically. And as a result of that, that's what people become addicted to. Okay. So the process of not being addicted is, it's a complex process. So that's what happens. And along with what happens is what kind of porn is a person using or watching, what kind of things are in the porn. They're influenced this way, they're influenced that way. All kinds of things happen from there. That's other people's addiction. So let me just talk about my little porn story with all of that said. And we'll talk about those issues that I just finished mentioning with more depth in other podcasts. I've already not decided, but looked at what I have at least a little bit of authority to present you with, in addition to the guests that I have outlined. Probably about 75 podcasts right now. And then as we go, there'll probably be more added. So, let me talk about my porn story. I've been avoiding this. And that's one of the things that porn addicts like to avoid. I'm an ex-porn addict, I guess. Or recovered. But they do like to avoid. So, without further ado, here we go. There was this guy named Chuck, and so I'm like 60 years old. Hopefully I don't look it. I'm a little bit more than 60. I'm not going to tell you my exact age. This is none. That means none your business. So, that's a different level of porn addiction than today, by the way. The magazine crew like me versus the guy who started out with high-speed internet porn. But again, we'll get into that in a whole nother podcast. So for me, it kind of worked like this. I had a friend named Chuck. Chuck was a hyper-sexualized, I guess, 8-year-old, 7-year-old guy, like in elementary school. Chuck pretty much was everything sex. Chuck, I don't know what was going on in Chuck's house when I think about this, especially from a professional standpoint. But anyway, Chuck showed me the first rubber. We thought it was some big deal, like, oh, I saw a rubber at the house. And we were like, oh, let's go see it. Oh, can you bring it to school? Oh, let's go see it. So, we had a field trip to Chuck's house, and we saw this rubber, and it was like in a matchbook, like an old matchbook type thing. And so that was Chuck. And then I guess one time over at Chuck's house, Chuck, had a Playboy magazine was the magazine at the time. And then, it was like, wow, golly. It was like, I didn't know that women look like that. I mean, I thought they look like we do. Ooh, wow. And I think before that, going back, there was this curiosity. And I think that this is part of how the porn takes over the men's mind, is the curiosity factor. So I think I always was curious sexually. And I think one of the things that Chuck told me was, hey, Joey, girls, they don't have things that hang off of them. What? He said, and I remember specifically the language was, girls are flat. What? So, yeah, Joey, girls are flat. What? Yeah, so I think that was like the whole curiosity started with the conversation about girls are flat. Because it was like, when you're living a world and you think the world is the way that you think the world is, and somebody tells you that the world is the way you think it is, you have that what? And so I had that what? And then so porn fit right into that, because it was like, oh, okay, yeah. So there we go. My porn addiction never really got to anything that I would say. I would say I was always like right on the line of addiction. And as we go, it went from Chuck to, in that day and time, like I said, we had paper magazine. So you could literally go to a drugstore and then like the magazine rack, because we didn't have internet and all that stuff like that, so we did rely a lot more on books and such. So you could go to the drugstore, and then they'd have like a magazine rack. So I would get like a bigger magazine, and then the porn magazine would be smaller than the bigger magazine, and then that's how I used to look at my porn, at age like 9, 10, 11, 12. Every now and then somebody would catch me and call me out, bust me out, and even my little light-skinned butt would turn red as you could believe in that situation. But that's what it was. That's how I got porn. And it wasn't something that happened every day, but I do remember riding my bike in my teenage days. If you know anything about Maryland, lived in a place called Rockville Silver Spring. Went to a place on Rockville Pike called EJ Corvettes, which is a place, it's like a department store that's closed now. And they had a big old rack of magazines and records at the same spot. And that's what I used to do. That's how I got my little porn thing off. I don't think it was at that time in the teenagers where it was like often. That was like, once a month or something of that nature. And that was that. I think in my early adult ages, I might buy a magazine here or there. As time goes on, I guess you'll probably hear the story of where I worked when I was young. I worked in a bar. I do remember the bar owner had me go and get magazines 3 at a time, and bring them back to him, which, think about this. I was 16. For some reason, they let me buy porn. And then I would bring it back to the owner. He wasn't that old. He was about 35 at the time. But then me as a porn recovery coach, I'm sitting here thinking about that now. Okay, yeah, he got 3 magazines. And he'd always just have a smile when I brought those magazines back to him. You kind of understand where I'm going. So I guess he had some sense of anticipation about what the afternoon was. So that basically was, my early exposure to porn. Every now and then, I remember I was married young. I've been married a couple times. We'll talk about that as the podcasts go. Me and my wife at the time went over to some party. Somebody played like a VHS. They thought that was funny. That was an exposure. I had some roommates after that wife was gone. I had one guy, a roommate, was into porn and Jack Daniels. So we watched a lot then. Those were movies like in the VHS sense that we would rent. And then, you'd go turn them back in. I guess you paid $1 or $2 for them for the night. So that was that. But I think going back, some of the movies that I did see back then, I didn't realize it at the time. But when I think about some of those movies did have some of the themes that that we'll talk about. Some of the themes about things and how women are treated nastily and inappropriately in porn. And I remember some of those as I prepared and think about that, even as I speak right now. I remember some of those movies, and hey, I gotta admit it, that I even liked were extremely disrespectful to women. So that's a little of that. And the movie at the time was Deep Throat, which also brings like one of my first memories about porn back, because I lived in an area, again, if you know that area of Washington, D.C., Montgomery County, Maryland, I lived in the area of Veers Mill Road and Randolph Road. So there's a Rodman's there now. I think it's a drugstore, but at the time, originally, it was an X-rated movie. And I was like 4 years old, and this is a real funny thing, 4 or 5 years old. And it was like on the marquee, Deep Throat, right? XXX. And I asked my mom about it, and she just gave me kind of like a mom answer, and like it's one of those things where as you think about it later on, it makes sense, but it didn't make sense then. So anyway, that place, ironically, it's a beer store now. Come to think about it, last I checked, I live in a different place now. So that was the early stages of porn. And then, as everybody knows, let's see here. Okay. So then there was this thing called BBS on the online world. Was like, what it was the equivalent of like a Reddit group. But basically, you would go to a server. It would be each group had its own server. So you could go to that server and you could download porn. It'd take all day to do it. Okay, one picture. And then you could, we had discs. There were 24 on a disc. And then you could download, you'd have 24 that you could see. And then what happened in 2004-ish, not really 2004, actually 1996, 97 or so, then the internet started to kick. Now, in my life, I was fortunate because some of y'all don't remember, but I was fortunate, maybe unfortunate, but I lived somewhere where they had picked me, as the guinea pig for high-speed internet. So because of we had high-speed internet like 2 years before anybody else, because they just they gave it to us, and then we had to get involved in talking to them about it and this and that, all that stuff. So I remember the first site was it was called Big Knockers. It was my first digital porn site. And then fast forward, they came out with the model. YouTube came out, so then they came out with tube sites. And the first tube sites would dump viruses on computers. These were movies. And like I was really into that. But then that would destroy computers. And they would put viruses on computers. You go to these sites and you hit this picture. It'd always be like the prettiest girl, the sexiest girl. Bam! She'd put a virus on the computer, and then they would sell you virus cleaner. But, I thought I was so smart because I knew something about computers. So I would, remove the crap. And then sometimes I would remove something else, and that ended up destroying the computers. So that kept on and on and on and on. So then what happened was I decided to stop destroying computers. So I went to just looking, like I would type something into a Google site and then just look at stills. And then what happened was I realized, back at the ranch, that the porn model changed, and they have like free porn, free movies all over the place. And then, of course, wow. And that was the beginning of me actually almost becoming totally addicted. So I'm going to take a break right here, and we'll get back to part 3, and we'll finish it all.